the Europeans of the West, or the so-called Westerners, are caught up in a fascinating moral dilemma. See, it's a real quandary. Nobody's there with them when they decide on these concepts they bring up, deciding the way they want the world to be governed. They never think about how it's going to impact them if things, don't go as they want. They're talking about a self-defense for the Israelis, oblivious of the fact that they themselves came up with a notion called self-determination, which is a fight to eradicate the institutional constraints that are imposed, you know, by domination. And the other one that they talk about, you know, self-development, which is the fight to remove these institutional constraints that are imposed by, that are imposed by oppression. You know, so these are things they come up. They come up with all these principles, all these concepts, um, non-combatant immunity. Speak about all these principles like that. Very flashy things they talk about all the time, but things that they don't seem to look into as something that is important when it doesn't benefit them. This is a world of arrogant unilateralism, a world of materialistic perversity and self-interested deadweight. You know, a world that is skewed to save or to serve or safeguard the interests of a certain group of people against people who are not welcome to dinner. People who do not buy their vision of morality. You know, I think it's morally unacceptable that you think that one rule applies for a certain group of people and not for others. If you're insisting on this whole notion of self-defense for the Israelis, mindful of the fact that the Israelis are the occupying settlers in that land. They pushed the people, the original people of the land, to the fringes of that society, with nowhere to go. They marginalized these people. They've made the people feel powerless through a punitive exercise of power, you know, massive extermination, material deprivation, punitive extermination, uh, callousness on an unprecedented scale. These are things that are imposed on people who are fighting, to free themselves from this colonial repression by the Israeli Zionist government. Well, there is a distressing poverty of sanity if when people see that when things don't go your way, they have to change the rules. You create these principles, nobody's there with you. All right. When you institute these principles, no one is there with you. But when things turn sour or when things turn rancid, when you cannot, when you have events, that cannot be managed, you know, then you have to change the rule to suit the kind of narrative that you want to project. You're going, Anthony Blinken is going to, is making a statement about Al Jazeera, insisting that Al Jazeera is supporting or supporting the Hamas, that is, it has taken a position that is totally against the Israelis in this perversity between Israelis and the Hamas. You see the bombings in the Gaza, you know, punitive extermination over there, punitive extermination of babies, man. People kill babies. There's people that drop all these vicious bombs, these thermobaric bombs. You see, burning babies inside those buildings. It's very sad. These are the same people that have the audacity to call other people savages. It's nothing new. They've done this to the South Africans when the South Africans were fighting to liberate themselves from the colonialist repressive regime of the white apartheid devils. You know, they call them terrorists, and on the basis of that immoral judgment, they killed so many of them, threw some in prison. They speak of the Nelson Mandela, Chris Honey, Walter Sisulu, Oliver Tambo. Um, oh, there's so many of these guys. Threw them in prison, called them terrorists. These are people that were fighting for their dignity, for the restoration of their dignity. I mean, people come to your home and make you feel as though you are worthless in your own very home. They want to make the rules, you know. They make the rules and try to impose the rules on you. You don't solve a problem through the imposition of values. You have to engage in consultation and try to find some type of compromise. If it is that you're interested in living side by side somebody, but if you continue, you know, if you continue with this policy of callous extermination, punitive extermination, you know, of a people who tend to disagree or who are openly disagreeing with you, you're only nursing, only sowing the seeds of recalcitrance. And when there is recalcitrance, it's going to be a revolt. And eventually the violence will only escalate. You're creating seeds, you're planting seeds of unending violence, unending passionate hatred. You're talking about a two-state solution, or a two-state solution. To what extent do you think that this notion of a two-state solution is going to solve the problem that you created? The amount of hatred that you're building in the minds of people. It's like instituting hatred in the hearts of people. These are things that are not going to go away so easily. You know, it's painfully absurd to see that the people that call others savages are the same people that throw all these vicious bombs, all these vicious explosives, and then go home and cuddle dogs and cats. You go home and kiss a dog when you kill thousands of babies. And you call those people you've killed, you call them savages. What if the Israelis never reacted in the way they are doing now? What if, okay, what the Hamas did was quite despicable, it's morally unacceptable. But do you respond to that by doing even worse than they did? You have to be a savage to do that, you know. Anyway, I just want to, highlight this issue because the world is in turmoil, you know. Things are happening, and the average European or the average American, if you go on the American streets, you see people just walking by. They don't seem to understand what is going on. Or they see some of these images on TV. Some may stop and wonder what is happening here, what is going on. But they don't actually seem to understand the gravity of what is at stake. You know, people analyze these things because people see, where this is going. I think even the American political elites, I think they're somehow scared when they sit down on their own and think about what they're creating, what they have started. You don't understand the problems that you created. You don't understand the gravity of the problems that you've created. You dig? They don't want to take a back step. As Malcolm X stated, the oppressor never takes a back step. The oppressor only retreats in the face of overwhelming force. These are things that happen when people understand these things, that people have to rise up for their self-determination, which is a fight to eradicate domination. And domination is an institutional constraint on self-determination. You see, domination takes away the right of a people to live according to their will, according to their customary valuations and all those things. You're making a case for Israeli self-defense. You have to look into this issue. Are you interested in solving this problem? Or are you just interested in, you know, trying to prove yourself right? Then what kind of problem are you really interested in solving? Do you want to tell the world that the Palestinian grievance or grievances are inconsequential in this dispute? What problems have you been trying to solve then all these years? Well, in a way, the tragedy that was fomented by Hamas could be seen as a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it was quite grievous to see that people wake up in the morning, and you feel a sense of hatred, a sense of frustration that would push you to the point where you take up guns and go into somebody's home or somebody's compound or somebody's country or a place that someone is living peacefully with his people or his family, and you go in there and just mow down everyone or mow down so many people. It's quite sad to see that. On the other hand, you could also say that it is because of that action by Hamas that the world is even talking about the urgency of this problem, the urgency to find a solution to this problem. So it is a double edged sword. So you cannot just say that the Hamas action was entirely void of some type of virtue. It may be an evil virtue, but it is something that is going to finally force people to look into the situation, look into the gravity of the situation, look into the grievances of these people, that has lasted, the grievances that have lasted for years. They talk of 75 years, or maybe longer. Who knows? When you see humans treating humans in this way, you begin to wonder, what do we go to school to learn? You know, the same people who are trying to promote this notion of a two-state solution between the Israelis and the Israelis have to specify the Zionist regime of Israel and the Palestinians, the oppressed masses. So we are dealing with the Zionist regime of Israel, which is the oppressor. I can even call it the adulterator, as opposed to the disenfranchised masses of Palestine, who are the oppressed. You know, you're trying to solve a problem between these two people when you actually do not want to acknowledge that the people of Palestine have been suffering from untold material deprivation, untold oppression and domination by Israel. You don't want to accept that these people are even existing. You don't want to accept that these people are just as humans as the Israelis, that the babies that are born in Gaza are just as human, are just as important, are just as precious, are just as godly as the children that are born in the Israeli settlements. You don't want to acknowledge that. And then you're talking of a two-state solution. When you have conflicts in Africa because the Africans are not powerful enough to defend themselves, when the Africans have an internal problem, when people rise up in African countries, you know, people that say they want to secede, people that say they want to topple the government, Often you would say that the governments of those African countries have to engage in dialogue, in a dialogue, and that dialogue has to be without preconditions. That is what the Westerners say all the time. But when it comes to something that concerns them, they don't want to dialogue. Why doesn't the Israeli government not dialoguing with the Palestinians in a way that is going to create a lasting solution for both peoples? How would you create a two-state solution? How would you actually implement that when you're only building this amount of hatred between these peoples? How would you create a two-state solution? That is something that has to be seen. Do you think the kind of violence that the Palestinians are seeing? I read somewhere, I think last night, that the Israeli bombing of Palestine is among the most vicious bombings in the recent history of humanity. It's writing this stuff as if it's something to celebrate. That's a perversity. That's shameful and altogether an insufferable burden of embarrassment. We ought to feel ashamed if we are not embarrassed to speak of humanity in this way. Well, there is a sorrowful absurdity when you say you want to solve a problem and you go and congregate at the United Nations Security Council and you're actually taking on one side and you're posing as a neutral arbiter, you know, a neutral habitat, claiming that you are taking on, you're talking on something that's going to be or that's going to be beneficial to everyone. You know, you're claiming to be the neutral arbiter that is talking as if he understands the all-knowing. You see, the omniscient problem solver, the omniscient, someone that knows everything. Hmm? You've looked at all the pros and the cons of the issue, and the only resolution you can come about with is that the Israeli self-defense has to be respected. That we have to respect the right of Israel to defend itself, but you don't have to respect the right for the people to decide on their own destiny. We don't have to defend the right for the people to live on the basis of autonomous choice. The people of Palestine deserve to have that right. It's a right that was decided by the Westerners themselves. That right is enshrined in the humanitarian constitution of humanity. I don't think the average Palestinians even knew what the right actually entailed in their lives. They don't know. You decide these things for them. But when it comes to the moment of implementing those things, you deprive them of that right. It's shameful. There is a sense of guilt in this issue. Franz Fanon speaks of his guilt in terms of metaphysical guilt. You're trying to deal with something that is contingent because it is easy for you to do that as opposed to actually dealing with something that is necessary. But what is necessary is what you should deal with because that's the only way you have to solve the problem. You're trying to avoid the problem by looking at, you know, expedient measures, expedient measures which are only going to necessitate even further measures in the course of time. As we go along with this madness, we're going to lose many more people, and the conflict is going to escalate into a full blown regional conflagration. Well, there is that possibility that this thing is going to happen. What are we interested in doing? Are you interested in solving the problem? Are you interested in removing the Palestinians entirely from that land? And if you succeed in doing that, what would be the case? What would happen to Israel? Remember what you did in Russia. When Russia invaded, the Russians say they intervened. You say they invaded Ukraine. The Russians intervened in Ukraine, as they say. And there was all sorts of condemnation. The Ukrainian flag became the Bible for the Westerners, or the people who are not in support of the Russian intervention in Ukraine. That's a conflict that was supposed to be managed through dialogue and discussions. They had a Minsk agreement there that could have solved the problem, that could have saved or served as a way of minimizing bloodshed. But you have people, European politicians, that openly declare that the Minsk agreement was only intended for them to make or to enable Ukraine to buy time to get the army ready, to build up an army that was capable enough, capable enough to stand up against the Russian army. And that was the problem. You cannot deal with the Russian situation in one way and the Israeli situation in another way. Now you're caught in a quandary, in a real quandary. It's a fascinating moral dilemma that you have to deal with. How are you going to manage that without losing face? You know, what happened to dialogue without preconditions? What makes it such a way that the Israelis do not need to dialogue with the Palestinians without preconditions? Why don't you want to look at the historical ramifications of this issue? Well, the Hamas uh, the killing by Hamas of the Palestinian people was a critical juncture in this problem. It's a critical juncture where things are not going to be the same again. Things are going to change from now henceforth. Yeah, because sometimes when someone is against the wall, when your back is against the wall, you have to do something to get out of that situation. And this is one of those kind of things. It's a misfortune. It's a very unfortunate incident, but at least it's going to help, you know, to raise this debate about this interplay between self-defense and self-determination. How do you manage that debate without losing face? The people of eastern Ukraine are fighting for self-determination. They don't want to be part of Ukraine anymore. But the Russian speakers, for the most part, of eastern Ukraine are fighting for self-determination. They want greater autonomy. They don't want to be part of Ukraine. Some of them have even voted, as we understand, to be a part of Russia. They want to be a part of the Russian Federation. But in any case, they don't want to be part of Ukraine anymore. That is self-determination. But the Ukrainians or the Ukrainian government does not allow that. So that's self-defense. You know, that's self-defense. So what is the point? What is the use when why did you come up with this notion of self-determination, which is enshrined in the Constitution of humanity by the Westerners for the most part? What is the use of that notion or that principle? And what is the use of this principle of non-combatant immunity? The people that are dying in these conflicts, most of them, or majority of them, have never even held a gun in their hands. The little babies, for instance, that are getting mowed down, that are getting polished off with impunity. They know nothing about these things, but they are victims of brutality that is untold, unprecedented levels of brutality that is imposed on children and the helpless masses. It's quite sad. You dig? In Ukraine, you say that the Ukrainians are fighting for self defense. The Israelis, you say that they're fighting for self defense. Now, what happened to the right to self determination? So you should just scrap it off. If it's not necessary, you should just scrap it off. Yeah, it's beautiful. Well, this is a quandary that will be very, very difficult for the Europeans to get themselves out of, because the longer this madness in the Gaza lasts, the more we're going to have problems. I mean, we're going to have this problem escalating to the point where it's going to be ungovernable. There's going to be ungovernable violence in that region. All right.